It is the early hours of the 5th of June 1944, somewhere along the coastline of Kent. A German reconnaissance pilot banks his aircraft low over the Thames estuary, scanning for movement. What he sees through his viewfinder should terrify him. Thousands of tanks, rows of landing craft stretching to the horizon, fuel depots, barracks, an entire invasion force poised to strike at Calais. He radios it back to Berlin. Hitler's high command redirects two entire panzer divisions to defend the Pas de Calais, divisions that would be desperately needed elsewhere in a matter of hours. Every tank the pilot photographed was made of rubber and compressed air. Every landing craft was scaffolding and canvas floating on empty oil drums. Every barracks was a plywood frame with painted windows. The soldiers marching between them were fewer than 100 men, walking the same routes again and again to leave enough boot prints for aerial cameras to count as thousands. This was not a lucky trick. It was the culmination of 4 years of British deception warfare, an entire shadow army built not from steel and gunpowder but from rubber, timber, sound recordings, and lies told with such precision that the Luftwaffe's own intelligence officers vouched for their accuracy. What follows is the story of how Britain built a force that fired no shots, killed no one, and may have done more to win the war than several real divisions combined. By 1942, Britain faced a problem with no obvious military solution. The country simply did not have enough equipment. Losses at Dunkirk had stripped the army of tanks, guns, and vehicles, and factories could not replace them fast enough to match German production. At the same time, commanders needed the enemy to believe Britain was strong everywhere at once, from the Egyptian desert to the beaches of southern England. A single armored division convincingly faked could tie down thousands of enemy troops guarding against an attack that would never come. The alternative, doing nothing, meant German reconnaissance would eventually notice the gaps, and every gap invited an offensive Britain could not repel. The scale of the deception required was staggering. To fool aerial photography, models needed correct proportions when viewed from 3,000 meters. To fool listening posts, engine noise needed to sound authentic across several kilometers. To fool spies on the ground, entire logistics chains, complete with fake fuel consumption and fake radio traffic, needed to exist on paper as convincingly as they existed in the desert or the English countryside. No single trick would work twice. The enemy had to be deceived by an accumulation of small, consistent, mutually reinforcing lies. The organization built to solve this problem was known as A-Force, established under Colonel Dudley Clark, working alongside the Camouflage Development and Training Center at Farnham Castle in Surrey. Clark had already pioneered deception in the Middle East, and his methods were refined by a strange mixture of engineers, magicians, and set designers pulled from film studios. Among them was the illusionist Jasper Maskelyne, whose exact contributions remain disputed by historians, though the broader camouflage units he worked alongside undeniably produced results that reshaped entire campaigns. The physical decoys were engineering problems disguised as props. Inflatable Sherman tanks, developed at a rubber factory in Middlesex, weighed under 40 kilograms and could be assembled by 2 men in under half an hour, yet from altitude they cast shadows and reflected light identically to a 30-ton vehicle. Dummy Spitfires built from wood and canvas were positioned on real airfields to draw bombing raids away from operational aircraft hidden nearby. Sound trucks, nicknamed sonic deception units, played recordings of tank columns and infantry movements through speakers powerful enough to be heard 3 kilometers away, engineered by technicians borrowed from the BBC. Perhaps the most elaborate operational use came during Operation Fortitude, the deception plan supporting the Normandy landings. An entire Phantom Army group, supposedly commanded by General George Patton, was constructed in southeast England using these techniques, alongside fabricated radio traffic designed to be intercepted and believed. German intelligence tracked this phantom force for weeks. Wireless operators impersonated the radio chatter of real divisions, transmitting in patterns that matched genuine military traffic down to the rhythm of individual signalers, a detail German codebreakers had learned to recognize and trust. If you are finding this interesting, a quick subscribe helps more than you know. German deception efforts existed too, though they rarely matched this scale. The Wehrmacht used camouflage and limited dummy positions on the Eastern Front, but lacked a centralized body coordinating deception across multiple theaters. With the sophistication A Force achieved, American deception units, including the unit later nicknamed the Ghost Army, adopted remarkably similar techniques from 1944 onward: inflatable vehicles, sound trucks, fake radio traffic, and several of their officers trained directly under British specialists. The difference was one of timing and integration. Britain had been refining these methods since 1940, weaving them into every major campaign from North Africa onward, while American units applied them intensively but for a shorter, more concentrated period in the final year of the war. The material cost of German confusion is difficult to quantify precisely, and historians are honest about that uncertainty. What is documented is that two panzer divisions, roughly 30,000 men and hundreds of tanks, remained stationed near Calais for nearly 7 weeks after the actual Normandy landings began, waiting for an invasion that was never coming. Every day those divisions stayed in place was a day they were not reinforcing the beaches where the real battle was being fought. The legacy of this shadow army extended well beyond 1945. Techniques developed by A Force influenced Cold War deception doctrine on both sides of the Iron Curtain and modern military decoy technology, from inflatable tanks still used by several armies today to electronic signature spoofing, traces a direct line back to workshops in wartime Surrey. Surviving examples of the inflatable decoys are rare, since most were deliberately destroyed or simply deflated and discarded, but a handful survive in the collections of the Imperial War Museum and smaller regimental museums across Britain. Return to that reconnaissance pilot over the Thames estuary, radioing back news of an invasion force that did not exist. He was not foolish. He was looking at rubber tanks built to be convincing, boot prints laid down by soldiers walking in careful circles, and radio chatter engineered by men who understood exactly how a real division sounded across the airwaves. He believed what thousands of hours of deliberate craftsmanship told him to believe. Britain did not win the war with rubber and plywood alone, but in the weeks that mattered most, when real soldiers were dying on real beaches, a phantom army made of canvas and lies held two German divisions in place, doing nothing, waiting for tanks that would never come. Sometimes the most effective weapon in an arsenal is the one that was never real at all.